I would like to, I don't know if this one works. Yes, it does. I am very pleased to wish you a very warm welcome to the first plenary session of the IAU 2019 International Conference. It doesn't work like this? No? Like this? Better? It does. Okay. So let me repeat how pleased I am to welcome you to this first plenary session of the IAU 2019 International Conference. I'm very pleased also to stress something that somebody put in my ear this morning, Inga Zalienene, who's director of Nicolas Romeres University. She said it is today World Quality Day. So is that not exactly the day on which to start a conference like this one, where the quality is already au rendezvous, but certainly will be the qualifier for the discussions we will have today and tomorrow. So thank you, Inga, for pointing to that very important day today. So let's celebrate quality, because that is what we mean for the future, and I think that the different presenters yesterday and today already have stressed we need to improve, and we need to look at how we can improve the quality of what we offer all the generations that come through higher education. And before starting, I would also like to have just a little technical information before I forget. I've been invited to not forget. And so at the end of the session, don't just wander off and do something else. We would like to capture this beautiful audience, and there will be a group photo at the end of the session. So please come all together down the stairs to take a group photo. I may not repeat. So universities, as you have heard and as we all know, are facing a number of challenges, to put it very mildly. And as Roberto Escalante from UDUAL repeated it yesterday all through, and as the introduction to what we held yesterday, a global meeting of associations, the universities in Latin America face particular challenges maybe these days, and in Mexico also. And we will have the opportunity to discuss the threats in particular to university autonomy. Let's not shove that under chairs and tables, but put it on the table and discuss it. So there are many challenges that universities face around the world, and they face it in light of very complex societies. Societies itself facing many, many different challenges. And that's what universities are looking at. So this plenary session will start to examine how higher education is rethinking itself, but also looking at how to rethink the societies and to look at what kind of solutions to develop for the future. So I'm very pleased to open this session, or to give the floor to somebody who will speak to us from afar. That's why I haven't invited the speakers to the table yet, because she will be speaking through a video, and so that the other speakers also can see what she will have to say. Carrie Facer decided to not come for two reasons, simply because she had many other commitments, which was the first reason, but also because she said she works on climate change, and she wanted to see if it was possible for a conference like this one to find a solution for her to take part, but then via video conferencing. She's Professor of Educational and Social Futures at the University of Bristol, but she's currently seconded at the University of Uppsala in Sweden as Zennström Chair in Climate Change Leadership. She works a lot on the relationship between the work that universities do and climate change. And in particular, she works on the development of radical and revolutionary alternatives for today and for tomorrow. So I give her the floor so that you can listen to what she has to contribute to the debates.
Universities for the future. One of the things that I've found over 20 years of thinking about the relationship between education and the future is that quite often we don't really have a fixed idea of what we think the future is when we have these conversations. So I'd like to invite us all just for a minute to close our eyes and just have a think. Imagine yourselves
No,
sorts of worlds
no,
you see.
people cannot hear.
What are you basing your
So I must admit, it is a real shame that this doesn't work. And it's really sad for two reasons. Not only because now we lose a bit of time, but more so because she really had a message that was very nicely connecting to the three other presentations this morning. And it would have made for a very beautiful panel. So either they managed to find a solution to this in the minutes to come, but I otherwise believe we need to move to the next presentation. But we need the presentations of the others. That's not a problem? So, okay. Then I would like to invite the speakers, the three speakers who are with us, to the table. Let me please introduce you first. May I invite José López Manchedo, the General Director, Strategic Planning from the National Association of Universities and Higher Education Institutions, to come to the floor. I would also like to invite Professor Barnabas
think about how
Nawangwe,
old
Vice
we're
Chancellor
likely to be at
Makerere
that
University,
point, or how old the
to come
students
to
that
the
we're
table.
working with now,
And
how old-
finally, I would like to invite Raquel Ismara Leon de la Rosa, Professor of International Business and Coordinator of the Graduate Programs in Protocol.
So, good morning, where you are, I believe, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you. Greetings from very snowy Sweden. So, transforming universities for the future. One of the things that I've found over 20 years of thinking about the relationship between education and the future is that quite often we don't really have a fixed idea of what we think the future is when we have these conversations. So, I'd like to invite you. The future is a real place. What sorts of futures are being made at the moment, and what's the role of the university in relation to this? Well, some of the futures that we hear talk of a lot and that we need to engage with fairly urgently are futures around climate change and the risk that we face of tipping into uncontrollable runaway climate change, given the tipping points and tipping cascades that we may be reaching. We also have futures of technological transformation. So we have Elon Musk sending cars into space. We have the significant and very interesting developments in genomics and biosciences. But we're also living in a world of geopolitical conflict and in a world of significant social unrest, as well as an aging world. So there are a lot of trends and developments that are at play at the moment that are going on in the world and that raise some questions for us as universities in terms of how we should respond. And what should the role be of the university in making the future, in making futures in these sorts of interesting times? Now, one response to this question is to say it's not really the role of the university to try to make futures. It's not the role of the university to engage in all of this. Our job is to retreat, to do the things that we've always been doing that will, in the long run, prove to be useful. There are some problems with that response, I think. Firstly, we are funded and supported by public institutions and public organizations and the public in general, who will be asking, well, what is it that you are for, dear universities, if you're not engaging with these questions? At the same time, I think if we look at the history of the relationship between social change and universities, is we have seen that in these sorts of conditions, other educational institutions set themselves up, other research institutions, whether this is the coffee houses of the 17th century, whether it's the Royal Academies of the 18th century and the Royal Societies, whether it's the very significant popular educational movements or decolonial educational movements of the 20th century. And what we're starting to see today is a whole range of alternative educational institutions beginning to establish themselves. This is not to mention the very significant research infrastructure that does exist outside universities already. But the educational institutions such as, for example, the Ecoversities Network, who are beginning to demonstrate what an educational agenda might look like that is embedded in place and in relations of care with the world. So I think our strategy, a response of retreat really, is one that has a number of questions associated with it. And it suggests really that if we don't respond to the world, then others will. Now, the kind of opposite response is a bit more gung-ho. It's a bit more, we can do this. So this is the response that says, yes, bring us your global challenges, world. We will fix this. We are the saviors. We can solve all of these problems, particularly with our science and technology. Now, there are also some problems with this sort of response. We need to recognize the fact that in the last 50 years, we have seen a huge and significant impact of humans and our science and technology on the planet, what Will Stephan and others call the Great Acceleration. And just as we've seen the increase in negative impacts on our ecosystem, so too have we seen a massive increase in universities over the same period. This is not to say that the increase in universities causes this, but it is enough to ask us the question, how is it that as we have become more and more educated over this period, our negative impact on the planet has increased? As David Orr has asked, he said, is it the case that we have become more educated, but not more wise? So perhaps rather than, if you like, running away or assuming that we can fix it, it's time to ask a slightly different question, time to take a different sort of approach. And if we're going to take that approach, I think it's helpful for us to think about how we as universities have responded to change before. And when I'm talking about we here, I am talking mainly about the European research university tradition that has informed development all around the world. But I need to recognize that university histories are obviously much deeper, more complex than the one that I'm about to present here. But this particular development of the university has been so influential that it's worth us bearing it in mind when we think about a question about how we rethink universities for the future today. So I'm thinking in particular about the emergence of the Enlightenment University. So that period in the 17th and 18th centuries, early 19th centuries, when the emergence of a radical proliferation of knowledge and information was starting to raise real questions about the way that universities of that time were organized. And in that maelstrom of new knowledge, new discoveries, new information, emerged the idea of the disciplinary research university, led obviously by the Humboldt brothers in Berlin. And this university emerges, as Chad Wellman argues, as a particular sort of institution to solve a particular sort of knowledge problem. These universities this university structure, Wellman argues, was designed to organize the institutions, materials, practices, and people of knowledge into a relationship, to order into a coherent whole whose end was science. The research university and its ethos of specialized science were a solution to a particular problem in the history of knowledge. Now, this particular solution brought with it some implications that we are still living with and that have an impact, I think, in terms of how we think we might start transforming the future today. So one of the key implications of the epistemological shift with the Enlightenment University was that the idea of the authority of knowledge, that epistemic authority and accountability should be with the discipline, with the academic body itself, rather than with the state or the church. Now, the way in which that survives, the way in which it maintains its authority, the way in which it, if you like, gains legitimacy for that particular argument is only if it argues that other potentially competing sorts of knowledge are not valuable. So with the rise of the Enlightenment University, we also have the exclusion of knowledge of Africa, of the East, of the Americas, of women, of everyday practice as, in Kant's terms, unreasonable and manifestly inferior. So when we look at the way in which the research university responded to the particular knowledge problem of the time, what we see is a gain in terms of technical knowledge through specialization, but a massive loss of knowledge that is embedded in people and place. And when this university knowledge principle is then allied with colonial and nation building projects, we also see it underpinning what de Sousa Santos calls epistemicide, so the killing of other sorts of knowledge. So what do we take from this very short reflection on a particular critical point in the history of universities? We get the awareness that universities have changed before, that those changes have been substantial in terms of the sorts of knowledge that is valued, but that some of the Enlightenment responses to change in the past, the ones that we are living with today, may be causing us problems in responding to change today. And here I tend to think about a kind of military analogy. If we think about generals, quite often the story is that they are always fighting the last war. And I wonder sometimes whether our universities are, if you like, fighting and addressing the last knowledge problem rather than the one we're facing today. So the question then might be, well, what is the knowledge problem that we are trying to solve today? And I'd like to suggest that this sustainable goals framework is as good as any other in really framing the challenge of knowledge that we're facing at the present time. And that is an awareness of the very complex and interdependent and messy relationships there are between all the sorts of challenges that are needed to create a better future. And surely, if nothing else, the aim of the university should be to create better futures than the ones that we're living with at the moment. Now, the problem with the way that universities tend to respond to these SDGs is that they filter them through the disciplinary structure and through the idea of the university, if you like, as separate from the world, with a number of negative consequences. So, for example, we see university vice-chancellors will all be saying, clearly quality education is very important and that's what we do. At the same time, we see the other goals getting dropped into disciplines and faculties. So you might see difficulties with life below water or life on land. Okay, the biosciences are dealing with that. Issues of clean water and sanitation, energy, infrastructure. Okay, the engineers are on the case. Good health and well-being. Well, obviously the medics and our medical faculties are working on that. All the complicated stuff around economics and around sustainable cities, yeah, don't worry, the social sciences have got that covered. So what you get is this fragmentation of the SDGs into different disciplines. We also get a number of SDGs that are not really thought about by universities because they're seen as, if you like, outcomes. So the outcomes, the challenges that we're aiming for to eradicate poverty, to produce zero hunger, to achieve climate action, All of these tend to get seen as, if you like, activism or impact work or applied activities that aren't at the core of what the university does, which is increasingly negatively thought about as positioning itself in a global market for international students and research funding. So this is clearly not a particularly intelligent way for us to respond to the contemporary knowledge problem that we're dealing with. And it might help to take a step back to help us think about, well, what does sustainable development mean? And the definition, the Brundtland definition, is one with all of its problems that we might want to work with. In other words, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that is an overarching question to ask ourselves in terms of our university practices. Seems a potentially interesting place to start. At the same time, what that does is it says you can't pick off each of these goals individually. You have to think about the interrelationships between them, the interdependencies between them. We know that, for example, you will not be able to achieve, fantastic sustainable cities and communities, decent work and economic growth, if your ecosystem is destroyed and if there is no clean water and sanitation. And there's a real risk that we're heading in that direction. At the same time, we know that we aren't going to make the climate changes that we need unless we have a more equal environment where we are able to ensure that people are not driven to destroy their environment by economic hardship. So these things are interrelated. There is no way that either poverty or climate action, for example, should be thought about separately. This becomes very visible when we think that 50% of the global consumption emissions are produced by 10% of the global population, and that 10% includes us in universities. So thinking through climate action and poverty together is, if you like, one of the ways in which we need to understand that sustainable development is a complex and interrelated knowledge problem. So if that's the case, then the question we might want to ask ourselves is, what would it look like if we in universities took seriously the complexity and dynamism of the world when we think about creating sustainable futures? How do we think beyond business as usual towards thinking about how do we develop a wise university? Now, what I've been focusing on in the last year or so is thinking about, well, how might that manifest itself at the level of the university? And I want to make a few proposals. Here, this analysis is drawn on what Sahai Inyatullah calls causal-led analysis. And I want to suggest that we have the opportunity as universities to act on 4 key levels. Firstly, at the material level, we as institutions can become leaders in terms of taking responsibility for the SDGs. We need to think of ourselves as material institutions. Secondly, at the structural level, we as universities have a huge opportunity to contribute to the rethinking of economics and to the generation of sustainable public dialogue about how we create sustainable and fair societies. And if that's our agenda, we need to think about the role of the university as a public institution. At the third level, we have this knowledge problem, this question of how do we learn to live with complexity and uncertainty, with the fact that the world doesn't cut itself up into easy disciplinary sized pieces. And finally, at what we might call the mythic level, we've got the fundamental question, how can we cultivate wisdom? How can we nurture wise relationships between people and planet? Now, if we look across the world, we can see that the seeds of a wise university are beginning to emerge in a range of different sites and practices. We can see at a material level that there are many universities experimenting with the idea of a living campus, with rewilding the land that they're responsible for, with developing strategies for food that are very low emissions. Importantly, we're seeing universities understanding the need to divest from fossil fuel investments. At the structural level, we're starting to see in places like Preston and Cleveland, the development of universities that take real responsibility for their economic impact in the local community. So the approach, the Commonwealth approach in Cleveland and Preston is a fantastic example of how universities can really see themselves as public and as economic institutions. And there are many examples. The Taloa network from around the world, for example, gives some real senses of how universities are beginning to think of themselves seriously as acting in public. At the epistemological level, at this question of knowledge, we're starting to see the development of really serious interdisciplinary programs that think carefully about how we stitch different sorts of knowledge together. And here, we're not simply talking about developing a set of modules and allowing students to pick from anything that they fancy. We're talking about really sustained efforts to build an understanding of the contributions that different disciplinary perspectives can bring. And one of the things that we're doing in Uppsala at the moment is playing with what I'm calling a faculty for symbiosis. In other words, a faculty and a research and an educational space that allows academics and students to come together to think about how they generate something new, something unforeseen, something that they might not be able to predict together. And the reason that we have a picture of a Portuguese man of war up here is because this particular creature is not one creature. It is a combination of different organisms that together create something new. And that's why we work with this as a metaphor for what we're talking about. And finally, at the mythic level, we're beginning to see a range of different approaches to thinking about how we enable students to find their place in the world. The mental health crisis that is confronting young people all around the world for a whole variety of reasons, from economic precarity to rampant consumerism to ecological anxiety, is really beginning to place a pressure on universities to take their pastoral role much more seriously, not see this simply as, if you like, what you have to do when you're trying to educate students, but to understand that one of the things that we're trying to do in a university is to develop wisdom and to develop young people who are able to be wise. So there are a whole range of different approaches emerging in the world where people are beginning to experiment with this question of how to develop a wise university. There are universities that are really beginning to understand that the knowledge problems that we're facing now are not the same as those that we faced in the 18th century and led to the structures with which we've been living for a long time. It is time now, I think, to reinvent the university if we want to create better and more sustainable futures. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to talking with you all shortly. So good morning, where you are, I believe, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you. Greetings from very snowy Sweden.
Now it will work so well. Now it will work so well. We listened to it 10 times. No, it's a pity. It's a very, very good presentation. I think we all agree. And if it would have started off right at the right time, it would have been even better. I'm now very pleased to give the floor to Jesus Lopez Macedo, who's the General Director of Strategic Planning of the National Association of Universities and Higher Education Institutions here in Mexico. Mr. Lopez Macedo has held several managerial positions in the Federal Ministry of Education before joining ANUS, and he will leave right at the end of this session because he has to work with the ministry even today. What is interesting is that ANUS and IAU work together. We were able to move our two conferences one after the other. Some of you may have gone to the ANUS conference, but what I'm very pleased to give you the floor for as well is to convey the messages and the outcomes of that very fruitful conference as well. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I would go we're a few minutes behind. Next, please. Just for people who is not familiar with ANUS, we are the most representative university association in Mexico. Next year we will be 70 years old. Our associate institutions, of which Benemérita, Universidad Autónoma de Puebla, is a member, serve around 60% of the national enrollment, and we carry up around 90% of the scientific research that is done in the country. Just as an introduction of where we are living at this moment in Mexico, as you all know, the Mexican political system is entering a period of significant changes, and higher education institutions are not immune to these changes. We have the traditional national priorities to accelerate enrollment rates, increase access to low-income students, review the public and private funding mechanisms for higher education. But at the same time, and that's why we are today, we are facing emerging challenges in the particular case of Mexico, mainly related with increasing quality and ensure the relevance of the educational programs. I had a very long presentation with lot of data. This morning I took the scissors to concentrate in a couple of issues towards the end. However, I have left to the organizers the full presentation if you want to dive into data. Mexico is a country with high levels of poverty. Around 1/3 of the population lives in what is considered below the poverty line. In addition, there are huge income disparities between regions and states, and between urban and rural populations. Even though the Mexican higher education system has experienced significant progress since years 2000, for example, the enrollment rate jumped from 18% in 2000 to almost 40% in 2018. That implies that the number of students in higher education passed from 2 million to 4.2 million, 2 million to 4.2 million in 2018, more than double. For example, in graduate degree enrollment grew by 2.5 times in the same period. However, we observe significant differences in enrollment by regions of states. Those states with enrollment rates below 30% are also the same states where poverty and underdevelopment are acute, most of them in the south and southeast area of our country. And as I mentioned before, we also have important challenges in terms of the quality of the higher education system. Evaluation has advanced significantly also since the 90s, but we are still lagging behind. In general terms, as I mentioned, the whole data is in the full presentation. In general terms, only 40% of the programs of higher education are recognized to have a certain threshold of quality. And as mentioned in the presentation that before mine, we face the new, not new, unfortunately we see them as new, but they have been there for a few years, of how do we adapt our education, higher education systems to the challenges of providing soft skills for students, adapt to a rapid technological change, and in general terms, what has been denominated Education 4.0 challenges. How are we responding in Mexico to these challenges? In the year 2018, the ANUYES elaborated a document called Vision and Action 2030. It was presented to the presidential candidates that ran for office last year, and it was presented to the elected president after the election. This is a proposal from the association on how to renovate, how to innovate in higher education to provoke institutional change, a structural change in our systems to deal with the challenges that we're facing as a country. So this proposal is a roadmap for the next 12 years. You can download the document in that address. Basically, the document proposed 5 strategies, 5 big areas of opportunity. First, it has to be with achieving a functional system. This means changing the legal framework of higher education to achieve improved coordination between federal and state governments and the higher education institutions. Right now, there's a new higher education law that is being discussed, and it is expected that it will be sent to the Mexican Congress in the first quarter of 2020. And one of the main aspects of this new legislation is that we need to define the planning mechanisms and the financial roles of all the actors involved in higher education. The second one is better education. We need to, in the first place, to increase access through policies to increase enrollment, target inequalities, and the regional gaps that I mentioned. Improve quality. We need to set review our current quality definition, set up new mechanisms according to international standards and best practices to achieve quality assurance, and very, very important to incorporate international perspectives to students and researchers. We are quite convinced that universities have to have a greater social responsibility role. They have to have a greater contribution to regional and national development, which the next presentation will address. And a very important matter in Mexico these days, and I'm sure in several countries, is how do we finance public higher education, how we ensure that adequate resources are allocated to build the countries that we are looking forward. As was mentioned before, last week we have our 5th international conference in Veracruz. In this, these are the aspects, that's why I sacrificed all the data that I have, because I want to stop here a little bit. We have our 5th international conference last week. We undertook a new thematic cycle to discuss how to adapt higher education institutions to the rapid technological change that we are experiencing. The previous 4 conferences were dedicated to define and identify how higher education institutions can contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. But starting 2019, we are starting a new thematic cycle. Our objective is start the discussion, put the ideas on the environment of the presidents of the most important universities in Mexico on how to pass from the traditional roles or approaches of our system to that is higher enrollment, diversity, but at the same time, what can we do? How can we start to foster innovation, to ensure the relevance of our academic programs? How do we introduce flexibility and adaptability in our curricular maps? And with the outstanding challenges of optimizing available resources and continue expanding enrollment rates. As the, for, the enrollment rates that we have as a country are not consistent with the level of development of Mexico. We are 10 points below 10 points below the average of the Latin American and Caribbean countries. We are 30 points below the OECD average. So, something is, we cannot jump immediately into the Oh, okay, I thought it was the time. We cannot jump immediately into the fray of innovation and structural change because we have the mandate from the society to ensure that more students, especially from disadvantaged groups, have access to higher education. This is to say that we have challenges in terms of what the future is demanding us, but we need to keep insisting in greater inclusion. Just very briefly, it was a very rich conference, very successful. Some of I see 2-3 faces that were last week with us. I would mention some of the main recommendations, main conclusions of our work. Most of the speakers underline the need to undertake structural changes in our higher education system in order to maximize capacities. Given the ever-changing and rapid change of the labor market and the environment that we face, we need to review the relevance of our academic programs. We need to work very hard this is it's easy to say, but very hard to do. How to introduce flexibility in our curricular maps. Most of you know how solid and how hard to move are the structures, the academic structures of your institutions. We also need to find out new certification alternatives. This is to make sure that there are horizontal exits for those people that do not complete a degree, but that they come up with the right credentials to develop successfully in the workforce. Something that was mentioned in the previous presentation. We need to find new ways of delivering higher education through some of the alternatives that were proposed last week, through accelerated educational programs with a more intensive use of technology to increase enrollment. And at least in the case of Mexico, we have the challenge of focusing all our academic and scientific and research capacities on applied research that really contributes to the development of the country. So where are we going now? Fortunately, we're starting to think on how to move forward, as I mentioned, with the new discussions that we are having at a high level in the conference. We have and some recommendations from an OECD report presented at the beginning of the year that addresses some of the structural challenges of our educational system, not just higher education system. We need to improve the quality in upper secondary education so students are ready to undertake a professional degree and to complete it successfully. We need to ensure adequate supply, diversity, and sufficient minimum quality in our educational programs. And if we want to increase inclusion, if we want to increase access, we need to have a better, we do have one, but we have to have a much better scheme for financial support to students. And from the higher education institutions, we have Vision and Action 2030. We also think that we need an improved national scholarship program. We're right now in 40% enrollment rate. We're proposing engaging all the institutional energies, both of the federal government, the state governments, and the institutions to achieve a 50% nationwide coverage rate by 2024, and with a gradual decrease in regional and interstate gaps, and also have a significant advance in the inclusion of students from disadvantaged population. That would be it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We see already some dynamics between the first presentation and the second. I would now like to actually give the floor to Barnabas Nawangwe, who's the Vice Chancellor of Makerere University in Uganda. What you bring to the table are quite a few things. Also, as a professional architect, I would say that you also bring some social sciences, humanities to the table, but you will bring perspectives on the transformation of higher education in Africa from a global perspective and a local one. So I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by thanking President Palm and the entire fraternity at IAU for the invitation to participate at this meeting. Before I make my presentation, I want to say what I normally say at meetings like this, that higher education has been greatly, in Africa, has been greatly affected by the World Bank structural adjustment programs of the 80s, where the World Bank told African governments that in Africa, higher education is a private good and it is not a public good, and that the government should concentrate on basic education. And of course, that has had very serious consequences for higher education in Africa over the years. But I must say that despite that kind of very destructive advice, we look at Africa now. In the 80s, there was hardly more than 100 universities in all those African countries. But now, there are more universities in Nigeria alone than there were universities in the whole of Africa in the 80s. The other thing that disturbs me is that even after they repented, I think last year, or they repented a little bit earlier, and they moved away from that very deceitful policy. Last year, they said that Africa needs to train 10,000 PhDs over the next 10 years. And I said, they are back at their game again. How can they tell us that we must train 10,000 PhDs over the next 10 years when we have the same population as China, and China produces 20,000 in a year? So what are they up to? But anyway, I keep quarreling with it, so I won't quarrel today too much. How is this? Okay. Can we have the next?
Siguiente, por favor. Technology.
So these two diagrams show the reality in Africa. Despite the big strides made in higher education, the creation of so many universities, we see that Africa is still largely lagging behind as far as higher education is concerned. The largest number of people going to universities is still in the global north. Yes. This pyramid is very typical of most African countries. And it shows the progression of children when they go to primary school, their first class, up to university. In the case of Uganda, out of the 2 million children that go to primary one, only 60,000 reach university level. And even of those, the universities cannot absorb all of them. So even if we have made great strides. Remember that in the 80s, we had only one university in Uganda, and the population was 2,000. Even with 100,000 students in all the universities, that is still a very small proportion of the population that actually goes to primary school. This map is very common. It shows Africa's contribution to research. And you see, when drawn according to the amount of research done, Africa becomes a pencil, even if our population now is a sixth of the global population. And I want to go back to what I told you. Some people don't believe, but for me, I believe part of the reason is those World Bank policies of the 80s. Now, what have we done as African universities? We have come up with some strategic interventions to try and change the situation. And because we believe that if we are going to transform our continent, we must concentrate on higher education, especially on the upper levels of PhD and master's training. And so there are some initiatives that we have come up with as universities. So we have formed partnerships for graduate training and research. Many universities have introduced online programs. We have established virtual universities practically in every country. The adoption of artificial intelligence is on the increase. But as Pam said, 70 years ago, there was a debate about vocationalization. That now is a debate in Africa. In many countries, definitely for Uganda, there's a debate. Are we going to establish a comprehensive university in every region, or should universities in the regions within the country address the issues that are in those particular regions? And can we afford to have comprehensive universities everywhere? So the question of vocationalization and specialization is coming back. Some of the organizations that have been formed to address these issues include the Association of Research Universities in Africa, ARUA, which is bringing together 18 research-intensive universities. And the idea is to share the resources that we have so that we can have a larger impact. We also have the Regional University Forum for Capacity Building in Agriculture. I think this is one of the most successful regional collaborations in which he has been to training people from across Africa, especially in the area of agriculture, where universities agree to receive students from partner universities at no cost. They don't charge them fees. They train them, especially in masters and PhDs. Now, what happened? This one just ago. I think I skipped some. There's the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa. And I'm glad that President Pam actually is a mentor for one of the students in Uganda. This consortium is trying to help in training students in research, especially PhD students. And it is having quite a good impact. It is, of course, a consortium of a few universities, but it is having some positive effect. And then there's a new phenomenon of creating centers of excellence. So we have got World Bank Centers of Excellence, and the regional centers of excellence that are supported by the regional universities and the countries. The online education, we seem to think that that is the way to go because the population of Africa is growing very, very fast. It is estimated that more than half of all the people below the age of 15 in the whole world will be from Africa. Now, that is a huge challenge. People are talking of the demographic dividend, but we are afraid that demographic dividends may not happen if we do not intervene as universities. So we are looking at the increased use of ICTs, training of faculty, especially at the highest levels, sharing of online content between universities. And here there are examples. For example, there is the Sphere, which is an initiative of the British Council that is bringing together several universities to share online programs, and the Partnership for Pedagogical Leadership in Africa, also initiated by the British Council. But there are others. Where am I going? Now, why do we believe that ITs will help us solve this problem? Because the large numbers of young people that are coming and they want to get a higher education cannot come to the universities that are existing, even if those universities are also increasing at a very high rate. The population growth is just too fast for the facilities. And so we think that the use of ICTs, which are increasing very much in Africa, is the way to go. And this graph just shows the position of African countries in the use of ITs, despite the low economic growth. And that just shows if some of the top internet users, it shows that quite a large number of the populations are actually using ITs. So if I get back a little bit back home, to the university which I currently lead, what are some of the strategies? I've already mentioned online, and so we have what we call online and e-learning, distance and e-learning policy, where we are saying everybody, not everybody maybe, but very many Ugandans want to come to Makerere, but we cannot absorb all of them. So we can avail that education through online programs. And so we have got a policy and a strategy for doing that. I've already talked about investment in staff development and the training staff in research grants, which we think is extremely important. We have policies on research and innovation. We have affirmative action, and also the enhancement of public-private partnerships is extremely important. Well, I can say that in Uganda in the 80s we had one university, now we have more than 50, but of those only 5 are public universities. All the rest are private universities. But even with the public universities, we are enhancing collaboration with the private sector, especially in the areas of training students on the job, what we call internship. Now, yes, we have had a very aggressive staff training program over the years. And at the moment, more than 60% of our staff have PhDs. In about 5 years, practically everybody at Makerere will have PhDs. But that is a problem for us because the salary wage is just blowing out of proportions, and we don't know how to handle that. Those are just some of the pictures of. Then we have to diversify our sources of income, because government expenditure, as they take on more universities, is decreasing, or at least it has stagnated, and yet costs are going up. So we are looking at ways of diversifying our income. We do not have the same situation like universities in the United States have, where some of them tell me they get, even though they are government universities, for many of them the government contribution is only 20%, because they can get a lot of money from contract research from industry. The situation in Africa, especially, particularly in Uganda, is different because we don't have developed industry. And so we are looking at different ways of diversifying income, investments on our land, and things like that. So what is the future for us? We believe that use of artificial intelligence is extremely important. I have been at conferences where people say, is Africa going to be left behind again as far as artificial intelligence is concerned? We are saying we really are doing everything possible to make sure that this time we are not left behind. We are debating whether there is a need to categorize universities. In Uganda, there's a debate that, Makerere need not continue training undergraduate students, that it should concentrate on graduate training and research, because there are enough universities to do the other work for the undergraduates. And in that way, Makerere can contribute by training quality staff for all the other many universities that are coming up, but also concentrate on research to look for solutions to the problems that we have. And so there is a proposal that we should become predominantly research, although I must tell you there is a debate about that, because many times we get the president to come to the university and he tells us we are a colonial university, a modern colonial university in a modern African state, because he thinks our curriculum is still colonial. We don't agree, because we think we have made a lot of transformations. Expansion of online programs is one of the things that we think we must do, and also strengthening regional collaborations. We have seen the benefits of collaborating between universities, and I think that is a very good way forward. I was told by the organizer to ask you a few questions at the end, and my questions are not as difficult as those of the first speaker, Fraser. So my questions are those. Does anything that I have presented look familiar to you? What would you do differently if you were an administrator at an African university? And can internationalization of higher education solve our problems of access to higher education? Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I think many will recognize many of the issues you face, but in different ways. So connecting after the session will be very good to discuss these. I just would like to say that maybe at some point José López Macedo will need to leave because he has a meeting in Mexico City. But we will share your full presentation with everyone. And the questions that will come for the floor or from the people, we will send to you as well. They have your contact information. So if you have to leave, well, we will understand. But I would now like to give the floor to our third speaker, Raquel Ismara León de la Rosa, who is Professor of International Business and Coordinator of the Graduate Program in Protocol and Business at BUAP. You are also well versed in international relations, and I would not be surprised if you would mix a bit of that, and you're a specialist on China. So you will bring some perspectives from around the world to your talk.
Well, good morning. Well, I really appreciate to being here, and it is a pleasure for me because, well, first, I'm alumni of this institution, and well, I think that I'm part of this transformation that particularly what has developed during these 20 years. So before I start my presentation, I just want to share with you, at the morning when I'm preparing to come here, one of my students uploaded something in the social media. It was a quote, I will retake it. He said, I'm studying for the future that won't even happen because of the climate crisis. So well, it was really strong for me, to be here right now. Well, I think that it could sound a little bit weird, But I feel happy because I think that we are maybe discussing this and we are on the time, maybe a little bit late, but we are trying to transform this situation in word. So well, for that reason, I decided to name my presentation Higher Education on Anthropocene Crisis, with thinking through the SDGs and the tech trends. So well, I think that my presentation is really close with the first one, and I will retake only some concepts about my idea. So well, the first one is to determine what is Anthropocene crisis and also the Capitalocene. So well, nowadays we are in this idea that humanity is part of this crisis because well, we are retaking these ideas about the global anthropogenic disaster, and also with this concept about Capitalocene, it's not only about accumulate capital or only the economic world. Also, we are driving to extinction. So, well, for that reason, I want to emphasize that right now, human, it could be this kind of geophysical force that are changing all this situation. So, well, we have here some kind of small data. Maybe some of them are really close to you. Right now, we are in this increasing of the global destruction of resources. At the same time, we are involving with this volatility of the strategic commodity prices. This is part because, well, right now in the 21st century, it's really different from the 20th century when we are talking about economic crisis. Because, well, in another time, we have another kind of conditions, but right now, we are face this kind of lack of resources. So, well, if we can add to this the food safety in a kind of risk because the slow growth and also the fertility, and also if we add the climate change, well, we have a really complex situation. So, well, right now, also, we are changing this idea about how this human development must be. So, well, we have passed from this first idea about human development, and right now we are talking about the sustainable human development. And, with this last term, I mean, we are integrating another kind of vectors like economic, like ecological, and also the sociocultural elements inside the society. So, well, I will retake this idea from Barrutia, Constantini, and Moni, that, well, right now we're not talking about only for intergenerational situations. We are trying to improve it, to go in beyond, and retake this idea about the intergenerational. So, well, for that reason, well, right now we have this challenge with the idea of the intergenerationality, and also this concept about the deprivation related with the sustainable human development. So, well, for that reason, well, we have this agenda. Well, everybody knows them, and well, we have discussed about this. So, and we have some kind of background with the MDGs. So, well, I just want to emphasize in one of them the goal number is 17. That is part of the innovation of this new agenda, and I will retake it in my following slide. So, well, when we're talking about this kind of new goals inside that 2030 agenda, we're talking about this looking about a partnership to get or to reach this kind of goals. So, well, for that reason, I decided to name this slide "Crisis and the New Paradigm Inside Development." So, well, we have passed from a vertical or a hierarchical structure to an horizontal structure that is part of one of my conclusions that I will talk about later. So, well, the idea is going beyond states, the government, and the government organizations. Well, yesterday we have this discussion in the opening ceremony about the role that must play another actors, in that case, the rest of the stakeholders inside this system. So, well, we must add companies and society. For example, I place over there this kind of transformation about how we pass from philanthropy to social responsibility, and nowadays we're discussing that comprehensive social responsibility. Well, this part of the company's proposal with all these kind of challenges. So, well, I have this question. Well, we are talking that we are trying to go into this new paradigm with a quadruple helix model. Well, part of this, I will retake one of the SDGs. We're discussing quality education. So, well, I put that as a kind of question because, well, if we review the strategy that we have set on the SDGs, we are talking about access, we have talking about reduce some kind of disparities, I mean, between the rural and the urban scene. Also, we're talking about gender, and also we are talking about infrastructure. Well, I think that we have to go in beyond that because of this Capitalocene. So, well, for that reason, I think that we're talking about challenges and education, and well, we have to emphasize that education must have a transformation role. For that reason, well, if we could look at the slide, in the first part, nowadays, we are trying to resolve this kind of late humanism. Also, we are part of this new innovation. And well, when we are talking about artificial intelligence, we're not only talking about, we have a lot of examples, because we're not talking about only this kind of innovation applied for economic processes. We are talking about also about this kind of challenges related maybe with robots, with humanoids. So, well, we have a huge agenda to determine these kind of challenges. So, well, for that reason, I think that we must create and debate about this kind of possible dialogue between these 21st century challenges and education. So, well, for that reason, we have this idea that education nowadays must be cross-disciplinary, and we must to create a new, or this idea about an integrated thinking. So, well, in that, I mean that facts, I mean cross-disciplinary and integrated thinking will be part of the societal transformation. So, for that reason, well, I would take some conclusions. The first one is that we need a new mindset because, well, it is part of our history. Talk about that. We see us like a human exceptionalism, so we must go beyond that. The second one is that if we're trying to improve this kind of quadruple helix model, well, it's necessary not work like islands, because, well, we have some kind of projects, for example, that the Global Compact. Over there, well, we have this relation between industry with, in that case, with United Nations. But, well, how could we relate all these parts of the model and going beyond the discourse? The third one, well, yesterday, Ambassador Juan Ramón de la Fuente, he said that, well, we are preparing people to the labor field. But, well, we have to change it because, well, right now, it is really common on the society, this kind of individual interest. So, well, we need to create or to have this kind of a spirit of the collective interest and create change agents in our universities. So, well, when we're talking about this integrated thinking, we're talking about, that is necessary, this new paradigm, a cross-disciplinary paradigm, and in that way, the idea or the strategy is to increase higher education institutions' agency on the political, economic, social, cultural scene. So, well, in the last part, I add some kind of topics that right now are necessary to debate inside academia. For example, or this understanding AI on society, circular economy business models, posthumanism, 4.0 industry, cybersecurity, real versus virtual identities. Well, I think that over those points, we have to create researching. We have to create this kind of new paradigm in this cross-disciplinary strategy. So, well, To finish my presentation, I propose this kind of model, a cooperative model, retaking this idea of the quadruple helix model. We have this idea of rethinking educational and related with the Anthropocene crisis. If you pay attention, in the first part, we have this idea of the structure. I named some kind of strategies right now in that 2030 agenda. Over there, we have this idea about the infrastructure, access, reducing this kind of scenes between the rural and the urban. So, over there, we have this idea that states and also the governmental organizations are the main actors, because we are determining, they are trying to create this kind of agenda. So, over there, they have more agency when we are talking about how to create a public policy and also infrastructure. So the idea is how us, academia, and also the rest of the society and industry could add to that kind of agenda. Well, I think that right now we are working that, but my addition for this kind of model is the functional or the societal transformation. Over there, I will emphasize, academia, society, and industry must be the main actors to resolve and to really create this societal transformation. So, right now, we are trying to create this integrated thinking, create new values and behavior inside our society. The result of this is to create a responsible geophysical force. Remember that geophysical force that I named at first. So, in that case, we create this kind of agency, and the idea is that we have this complementation with the state and also the multilateral organizations. So, to close my presentation, I just want to share with you this quote. You know that I'm a sinologist, and for that reason, I retake this quote. Education breeds confidence, confidence breeds hope, hope breeds peace. Confucius. Thank you so much.
So, dear colleagues, thank you very much for these very thought-provoking presentations. And I know you have to leave. Thank you very much for your presentation. And again, it will be shared online on the website with your contact details so people can get back to you. What the four speakers have shared is that there is a real dynamic for transformation of higher education in many parts of the world, and that there is a call for that transformation, but the how-to is coming with some suggestions, and we will have the opportunity to discuss those in the breakout sessions. I'm very sorry to say that we won't have time to take questions. However, I would like to say maybe one in this row and one in the other one. We will have no answers, but raise one question that we then could use in the breakout sessions if you wish, if you have one burning question. And I would hope that our speakers will be present in the breakout sessions so that you can contribute to the discussions and also respond to the questions that you certainly have raised in people, because your question, does it ring a bell and does it resonate with you? That will be very interesting to debate from very many different points of view. So if you have one burning question here, I will take it, no answer to it, but just thought-provoking. And I look around, do I see a hand raised? Not really. And one question there? Yes, one. I don't know if there's a microphone. I will come.
Okay. So I'm Professor Magaji from Africa. I just want to respond to the question posed by the Vice Chancellor of Makerere University regarding the access to education. I think what we should be able to do is to focus on the online and distant education and collaborate with bigger universities that have facilities to assist the African university in order to be able to access, education. Thank you very much.
So that will be the focus indeed on two of the workshops also, the online access and technology. So you won't have time to respond now, but you will later. And I would like to invite you to come back to the room, and we will get into the next session. as we would like to bring your attention to one particular program that we developed at the IAU, the ISAS, the Internationalization Strategy Advisory Service, and that is a service that was actually developed under Iva, the Grand Polak. So I would like to invite you to the floor, together with Giorgio Marinoni, who's administering and developing that program much further today. And we're very pleased because this is a program that has had many resonances around the world, and I give you the floor to explain it.
Thank you very much. I realize that I'm standing between you and coffee, so I will not make a lengthy presentation of the ISAS, but I do want to say that it is one of the membership services that IAU has been offering since 2010 to universities that find it of interest to have, in a sense, an external stimulus to their thinking about how to internationalize their university. And it has a variety of opportunities and options, and I think that so far the 15 or so universities in every region of the world have found them useful and have found them highly stimulating. But this is not the point of this particular session. The point is to award 2 of the universities that have accepted and participated in this project with their learning badges. So I would like to invite Professor Takahashi from Toyo University in Japan. This university chose to ask ISAS to look at the strategy they already have in place and to help to identify best ways to achieve or to monitor their achievements. And we had a very successful, I think, process with one of the best self-assessment reports that I have ever seen. The university spent almost a year interviewing their community, students, faculty, and staff to really learn what was going on. And it was absolutely excellent. And I'm very, very thankful to also recognize the participation of Yumi, and Kaku, who was one of our key counterparts and who I think helped us very much. In addition to Giorgio Marinoni, who acted as one of the experts, we also benefited from the expertise from Betty Lesk from La Trobe University in Australia and from Aki Yonezawa from Tohoku University. In each case, we invite one of the local experts to join us because the context of internationalization is very, very different depending on the country and the institution. So Aki also joined us. So on behalf of the IAU, it is a real honor for me to help Giorgio present Professor Takahashi with the learning badge. Thank you. Would you like to comment?
So thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here. And we could review of our internationalization activity when we have evaluate our activity. So it's good opportunity for us to devise our internationalization strategy. So I'm so happy to be here today. So technology days. So anyway, thank you very much for okay.
Thanks, Giorgio. Do you want to say anything? No? Okay. Thank you.
So I forget appreciation. So anyway, I appreciate IAU and expert panels from IAU. And also, I would like to show my appreciation to my colleagues, especially the Miss Yumi Enkaku. So she's a photographer today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And obviously, Yumi was a multitasker on our project. Thank you very much. Actually, Japan has been a high number of beneficiaries from Japan have taken part in this program, so we're very pleased. Thank you. I would also like to call on the second university to receive the award, which is Kalinga Institute of Industrial Technology, KIIT, which decided to take a different strand of the ISAS service. It asked the expert panel to help them plan and develop their strategy. There wasn't a strategy per se at the institution, although it had international links, but no strategy. So this particular process was slightly different. We benefited in this case from the expertise of Hans-Georg van Vliet from Tilburg University in the Netherlands and Professor Simha, Vice Chancellor of SKM University in India. And of course, Giorgio was also one of the panel members. Again, an incredibly interesting both reading about the university prior to going, but also a very interesting site visit. This is a very unique institution that actually serves pupils from primary school all the way to the university. And I had the most incredible experience of speaking to a group of no less than 5,000 young girls who were still in their primary and secondary school, not yet at university, but who were sitting in this incredible auditorium and listening to my few comments with so much enthusiasm, I will never forget it. But KIIT has earned this badge after having submitted to IAU a new strategy for internationalization. And so I would like to congratulate, and I would like Dviti, whose last name is unpronounceable, to, to convey our congratulations to Dr. Samantha, the founder of the university, but also to the registrar who chaired the steering committee. Her name is also Dr. Samantha, but they're not related. But they worked very hard. So Dviti and Vikas, I would like you to thank them on behalf of IAU and to congratulate all of KIT and its staff for this learning badge. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Vikas, thank you so much.
Thank you, IAU. And on behalf of Dr. Samantha, I'd like to thank IAU for giving us the badge. And last month, the Prime Minister of India declared 20 universities, University of Eminence tax to 20 universities. So KIT University is one of them. I think this badge will help KIT University to promote internationalization in education and all. And we work at the same time. It's one of the I think only one of those few universities in the world which provide free education to 25,000 indigenous students of this country. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before closing, just some short information about there are some ongoing ISAS 2.0 projects. There is one in Russia at People's Friendly University of Russia, RUDN, which is almost finished. And next week, after this conference, we will be in Italy at the University of Bologna, where we have another site visit for another ISAS program. And we are also in contact with some other university for more ISAS. So please, if you are interested, just come look for me and contact me, and we will be very pleased to discuss with you. And last but not least, I would like to thank Eva, not only for having created this program, but also for having chaired both of them that you have seen here and the next two that are undergoing. And of course, thank you very much also for Illich for her supervision of this program at IAU. And now, coffee break for everyone.
No, that's it. When you give the microphone to somebody else, then all of a sudden your program goes in a different direction. No, you remember that we will have a photo, so thank you. I see some people have registered that information. There will be coffee on the way, so don't stop. Photo first. And then we have a very interesting puzzle later for the lunch, and there we need expertise of the expert. And so Trina would like to explain how the lunches work, because otherwise you may end up in a different place and not know what you will eat. So the floor is yours.
Yeah. So the lunch will take place in two restaurants which are situated on the left side of the complex. It's a French and Argentinian restaurant. So in both restaurants there is a regular meal. There is also a vegetarian menu for all those who signed up for vegetarian. So what I want to let you know is that those who have special allergies has to go to the Argentinian restaurant. So if you have indicated any food restrictions, please do go to the Argentinian restaurant called La Boca. Anyone else can just go to whatever restaurant you would like.
Is good. We tried it, so we know that, and we hope you will like it as well. So now that we're running a bit late, you ask yourselves, do we start at 11:30? Of course we do. No, we don't. We give you a bit more time, and we will start the breakout sessions at 11:45 instead of 11:30, which means that we have time for the photo. Imagine everybody down, and then the picture. And then we wish you excellent discussions in the breakout sessions, because the topics are fascinating, and we look forward to hearing how that goes. The breakout sessions will be here. You have room 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the photo is over there, the coffee is wonderful, and then we look forward to seeing you at 11:45.
And if you don't mind taking the staircase, it's on your left-hand side, because the escalator don't like too many people at the same time. So if you don't mind taking the stairs, some of you, it's on the left-hand side. Thank you.